Hi, everyone. We're back again today with Alan Rosenberg from New Jersey Animal Observer and Aubrie Kavanaugh from No Kill Huntsville. I always stutter over Kavanaugh. I don't know why that is. Sorry
It's a
about
long name. Yep.
that. But we're here today. We're going to be talking about after COVID, or not even after, I mean, we're still in the pandemic. But what we did see was a great outpouring of fosters and adopters when this first happened. And a lot of animals left the shelter. A lot of shelters were actually empty. And the question has come up, you know, are fosters and adopters still engaged? What has this done to the dynamic? There was a question out there, put out there on our American Pets Alive uh, rescue and shelter support page, where someone actually asked that because they did not have, they were talking particularly about dogs, just so you know. It wasn't all homeless pets. And they said, you know, we're still pretty empty. We actually have a shortage. And that was Lydia Sattler of Animal Services Director for Jackson County Animal Shelter in Michigan. And there were a lot of answers. And I'll admit there were a lot of answers that were, oh, wow, you know, if you need dogs, just let me know. I'll send them right away. But there were also some really good ones. I saw like 3 or 4 as I was just looking at it, researching this topic, of people that are saying, no, since then, we actually have kept the shelter pretty empty. So we kind of have a mix out there. I think it's positive that we had those. I do want to say I made a comment on that trail, where I had said, you know, what I see this is something that I think you both know I talk about all the time. Colorado takes in a lot of animals from other states. We always have. I think it was 35,000 in the last year recorded. And that's great that we help our neighbors. But I feel like rescues don't always look just down the block. And I think maybe there is an opportunity right now because of this negative environment that the pandemic has brought out on to actually do a better job of locally rescuing and with fosters and adopters being available. But will that continue? I don't know. So I'd like to ask your opinion. Alan, why don't you start? What do you think? Are fosters and adopters still engaged, and can we continue to keep animals out of the shelter?
Well, I think, the best thing to do is look at this pet point data that's been out there. I know we talked about this in an earlier video. So pet point is a shelter software provider, and they've been basically tabulating statistics on their users since COVID-19 hit and comparing it to the prior year when there was no COVID-19. And basically what happened, it's true the shelters have been empty or have much fewer people or fewer animals in the physical shelters. And at the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis, that was due to increased fostering. But really what's happened since then is actual adoptions and actual fosters are actually going down, at least the number of animals sent to foster homes and adoptive homes. And largely that's due to significantly decreased intake at the shelters. So the shelters are not taking in as many animals, some because people just aren't losing them or aren't seeing them lost, and some reasons because the shelter policies are just, they're very restrictive right now. So I think there's something of a misguided narrative out there that adoptions and fosters are increasing. It's true there may be some kind of off the book fosters where someone finds an animal and the shelter doesn't impound it and doesn't count it as a foster, but the person is kind of acting like a pseudo foster. But actual fosters at shelters are lower. I will say anecdotally, the demand for animals, both adoptive and foster animals, I think is higher. And I think there's a lot of people out there that want to get these animals and they can't because the shelters don't have them. So, I think that there is a demand out there, but if you look at the pet point data, you do see that the number of animals going to foster homes is decreasing since the pandemic happened. And I think that is because more and more people are going back to work and are less able to foster them. So I think there will be, in general, more people who want to foster animals than before, but I don't think the surge is quite as high as it was earlier on in the crisis.
I'm just curious if you saw in that data, fosters, number of animals going to fosters is, you're seeing a decrease. Did you see an increase in adoptions?
No, total outcomes and adoptions is much lower.
Interesting.
Likely due to the fact that shelters are taking so few animals in now that they're not adopting many out. I mean, intake is down, at some points of the crisis, 50%. I think it's the decrease year over year now is a little less. But I think that is driving the fewer adoptions. There's just fewer animals at shelters. So I think people want to adopt, they just don't have animals to adopt. On the dog side, at least. Cat side, there's probably still plenty of those. But on the dog side, I think there's definitely a frustration among many people, including myself, that there aren't as many dogs available at shelters to adopt.
Interesting. So Aubrie, what have you been seeing with fosters and adopters? I don't know if you have any data or if you've just seen some anecdotal evidence.
Well, this is a perfect example of different things happen differently in different parts of the country. In my own area, we initially had a stay-at-home order, which wasn't particularly restrictive. Then the governor changed it to a safer-at-home order, which again wasn't particularly restrictive. And for context, I mean, I live in Alabama. So if you watch the news on any given day, you know that we're one of those states where the numbers just keep going up and up and up. So having said that, though, a lot of people have gone back to work. And what we've seen is we had a period of 3 months where the shelter census was incredibly low, the lowest it's ever been. I mean, I think at one point the shelter director told me she had 10 dogs, which is just unheard of, right? But here we are, July, and we're pretty much back where we were. I think that as people have gone back to work, more animals are getting loose that weren't getting loose before because people were at home. It was easier for them to keep them contained. But now that those people have gone back to work, more animals are running loose. We had a surge of animals being fostered, which was great. We had people that had never fostered before because they were at home and they could actually monitor an animal in their home, whether it was for, a long weekend or a week or 2 weeks. They were all about fostering because they were at home anyway, but those people have gone back to work. So we have more animals in the shelter. We've got fewer people fostering because they've actually physically gone back to work. And it's not that we've lost those fosters. I think that a lot of people, the good news is people that had never fostered before were introduced to it. And now they understand how easy it is to help an animal, because when you're fostering an animal, you learn about that animal's personality, and then it makes it that so much easier to place that animal. You can get photos of them, crashed out on the couch with their legs up in the air. You can get video of them playing with your children. So it makes it that much easier to place them, but we're kind of like back to where we were, I would say, in February. And I can only speak for my part of Alabama, but I think that because that's the way the state has gone in terms of so many people going back to work, it was nice while it lasted, but it didn't really last. Now, that's not to say there isn't positive out of it. We brought more people to the table, more people are fostering, more people are aware that there are animals in need, and we're not going to lose those people, but we don't see the long-term effect of that period that we had for a number of months. I have yet to get the shelter data for our shelter for the month of June. I've requested it and just haven't received it yet. Once I get that data, that's really going to tell the tale, because for 3 months, the live release rates at the shelter were higher than they've ever been, because there were hardly any animals in the building. But I'm afraid, at least in my area, that the honeymoon didn't last.
Well, they're both interesting views. In Colorado, I don't have data either for what I'm seeing anecdotally. What I'm seeing online is, well, first of all, during the beginning of the pandemic, I mean, there was one shelter, I think it was Max Fun, with over 1,000 on the waiting list to actually take animals, which was great, right? That was awesome. There was a real surge going on out there, and hopefully that continues. We won't know that without data, but I think online I have seen less pleas than I have in the past. I still see them. There's absolutely people that get animals to homes in either foster or adoption, but I feel like it's gone down. But I was trying to figure out, cause and effect. Is it that there's less animals? Is it that people are less engaged? There's so many things going on with our social movements in the U.S., the pandemic at the same time. What is really happening until we see the data? I don't think we know for sure. But this was all three of our experiences regionally have been slightly different, which is kind of interesting.
Well, I mean, David, just add, if you look at the pet point data, you can see that nationally, at least overall nationally, intakes are now starting to increase versus where they were before, and they are exceeding outcomes, which is a normal seasonal pattern, by the way, at this time of year. But shelters are still have a lot fewer animals than they did at this time last year. So I think what that's indicating is we're slowly normalizing, and ultimately shelters are gonna get up to the capacity once everything's normalized. But so I think that's kind of the big trend out there. So I think, the $1 million question is, are people out there going to keep on wanting to foster animals and adopt animals when shelters really need them, like when they're at capacity? And I suspect there will be a higher demand in the future because of the awareness that Aubrie mentioned. But I still think that's going to be an interesting phenomenon out there. Is my gut tells me that people will want to adopt and foster more animals, but it will be interesting to see how that pans out when intake inevitably increases close to what it used to be before all this happened.
You've reminded me of a short-term fear that I have, and it's unfounded again without data. We have to see. We'll have to wait and see anyway. Is that in Colorado anyway? Basically, TNR was stopped because of for a while their surgeries were not allowed, and secondarily just the TNR act of a bunch of people going out, especially if it was a program where we're going to TNR our community. Bringing all those people together was just not acceptable. So we've done a lot less TNR in the spring and summer in Colorado. I hope that doesn't have a negative impact, but we'll have to wait and see the data. And maybe that's a whole other subject for us in the future. But with that, unless if either of you have anything else to add, we're kind of running out of time. Thank you so much for this time. This was a great conversation, and we'll be back again. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Aubrie.